Western civilization is moving closer to a point of irreconcilable, unstable equilibrium, as frighteningly increasing numbers of people trust nothing. Media, academia, and especially the governments are no longer held in high esteem. Regaining trust is often impossible after betrayal. However, transparency is essential to any healing process, and that is the essence of the Don Sullivan Show. Please listen to the team explore, probe, and debate cutting-edge science, technology, and computing. Play ball!
Welcome to a very special episode of the Don Sullivan Show. As you can hear, Don is currently on the road, and you're going to learn more about that very shortly. I'm your co-host, Jersey Steve. First, we want to thank our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by License Fortress, the industry's first and only software asset management firm to offer both a financial and legal guarantee at its highest level of service. Whether it's Oracle, Microsoft, or VMware, License Fortress helps organizations stay compliant, avoid audits, and save money. You can learn more at licensefortress.com. And please support our producer, our wonderful producer, Bill Axt, by visiting axtinc.com. That is AXTINK.com. You can subscribe to his YouTube channel and help support his efforts to create humorous animation, as well as run our website, all while researching a cure for baldness.
Welcome, everyone, again to the Don Sullivan Show, the show where we talk about everything having to do with science, technology, and computing. Today's going to be a little bit different, as our friend and folk hero Jersey Steve is not going to join us, and in fact, I'm not going to have any guests on this show. It's going to be totally solo, but we're going to have an amazing discussion. We're going to have an amazing description of an event that's occurring out in western Colorado in an area of what's called the Dinosaur Diamond, specifically in the town of Fruita. And so we're going to talk about the town of Fruita itself later on. We're actually going to have this episode in two separate parts, because even though these subjects are very different, that is, dinosaurs, in particular dinosaurs in this event, the Dinosaur Days weekend event at the Dinosaur Journey Museum here in Fruita, Colorado, it's pretty hard to avoid the history of Fruita and western Colorado and the plush history, as well as talking about dinosaurs and the late Jurassic formation. So completely two different subjects, but very apropos for a show for about what we're doing here today. It's a wonderful event, happens every year at the Dinosaur Journey Museum in Fruita, Colorado. Kids all over the place. The people who work at the museum who put on the show every day are awfully busy. There are artists here, artists that were worked with and consulted for Jurassic Park, for example, or Jurassic Park vehicles all over the place. In the museum itself, it's relatively small, but there are all kinds of fossils or replicas of fossils from the various different dinosaurs, again from the late Jurassic period in the 100 million plus year ago time frame, that were discovered in this particular area. And again, we'll talk about the entire Dinosaur Diamond here in a second. But this is going to be a wonderful episode overall. Steve will have lots of comments, but he's not going to be here with us today. And as you know, on the Don Sullivan Show, we have all kinds of shows in which I run around the United States and the world and talk about all kinds of different things that teenagers and even little kids love dinosaurs, and so do 63-year-old kids. And there's lots of 60-year-old kids here with their grandkids looking at all the different exhibits outside as well as inside. And there are hikes around the area of the McGinnis Conservation Area, National Conservation Area, which is part of the Bureau of Land Management, which the town of Fruita sits sort of right in the middle of. Wonderful hiking. And we'll talk about some of the different dinosaurs and other paleontological finds that have occurred in this area. But as always, we have to issue the disclaimer from our lawyers at a lawyer's insistence. I'll just take a second here. And again, at a lawyer's insistence, I have to read this. It's always silly. I need to read the obligatory disclaimer waiver. All statements by the host and the guests on the Don Sullivan Show, which will be just me today, are the personal opinions of the host and the guests, who all agree that the following content is the property of Xanalytics LLC, to be used publicly and exclusively on the Don Sullivan Show alone. So to start off with, let's talk about the Dinosaur Journey event. As we're walking around here in the parking lot, there are dozens and hundreds of kids. The parking lot is completely full. I've been in this museum a number of times out here in Fruita, Colorado. And as I said a moment ago, it has lots of different replicas and actual fossils from the various different finds in this little notch of the Dinosaur Diamond, which Dinosaur Diamond itself goes from western Colorado up into northwestern Colorado to the Dinosaur National Monument, part of the National Park Service, in both northwestern Colorado and northeastern Utah. Vernal is the name of the town, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we go along as well, all the way through Wyoming and down into Utah, and then out back here east into western Colorado. And the sort of eastern point is Fruita, Colorado. Fruita itself, as I mentioned, sits within the vast area of the McGinnis Conservation Area, National Conservation Area. It's part of the Bureau of Land Management. Tremendous hiking and mountain biking and so on, and sandstone. Sort of another little known place that the Don Sullivan Show likes to focus on. But tremendous scientific discovery has been done here. There are a number of different dinosaur digs that are still active. So the Dinosaur Journey Museum and the Dinosaur Days weekend, which occurs in second or third week of June, depending on how they set it up. It's usually very hot. It's 97 degrees out here in the later afternoons of both of these days. And we're going to have to deal with that heat as much as possible, but there's so much that goes inside, mostly for kids, because kids love dinosaurs. But as I said before, so do 63-year-old kids. There's so much very, very interesting, and as the time has gone along through the study of paleontology over the entire Mesozoic era, which goes from the Siberian traps about 250 million years ago until the asteroid hit about 66 million years ago, known as the Cretaceous Tertiary boundary, or the KT boundary, which they use K for the Cretaceous, which is kind of funny. The Mesozoic era breaks up into three separate time periods. They are, of course, the earliest, the Triassic, the Jurassic, and the Cretaceous. The Tyrannosaurus rexes, that are probably the most famous of the dinosaurs, are best known for the 50 to 75 million years of the Cretaceous period. The Allosauruses are before that in the Jurassic period. So sometimes Hollywood takes a little bit of liberties with the way that they name and create the narratives and so on. But it's still incredibly compelling and incredibly interesting subject matter in every respect. So walking through this museum, there are tremendous, again, replicas of the various different dinosaur finds from the Trail Through Time area, the Dinosaur Hill area, and a number of others. But there are actually some real fossils here as well, and you see the little kids walking around and being totally fascinated by the size and the ferocity of, and the size in the respect of both the size of the large dinosaurs, but even the smaller dinosaurs. Hollywood has made the velociraptors, for example, out to be very large. And maybe they were, maybe some of them were bigger than cows or horses, but the velociraptors here on display are the size of maybe a German Shepherd dog at the most, which is really kind of interesting in, again, the way Hollywood changes the narratives around. But so much of this is so interesting and so much fun. I really do recommend that anybody who's coming out along Route 70, the Dinosaur Journey Museum is just about a half mile off of I-70 in the town of Fruita. And it really takes a half hour, an hour to go through it in a very comprehensive manner. And again, if you're interested in doing some hiking, maybe not in times as hot as it is right now, but if you're interested in doing some hiking, some short hiking, going a little bit further, a couple of miles to the Dinosaur Hill, or a couple of miles down Route 70 through the trail through time, you'll see lots of exhibits for the various different dinosaur finds. Very cool stuff overall. Now, as we've spent a couple hours here at the Dinosaur Journey Museum and the Dinosaur Days event, again, it goes for both days this weekend, we're going to proceed south a little bit. As I just mentioned, there's a hiking trail near what's called Dinosaur Hill. It's only a mile-long trail. It's a little bit steep at parts of it, but it's maintained extremely well, and it's a lot of fun. It's depiction or a monument as well in the McGinnis National Monument, or McGinnis National, not a national monument, the McGinnis National Conservation Area. It is a monument to one of the great early finds of this area, the whole Dinosaur Diamond, particularly western Colorado, of full dinosaur bones. So what you find is a particular monument about halfway through the trail, and we're there now, of what's called, and I don't know if I really pronounced this correctly, but an Apatosaurus. It's basically a form, or I guess a subspecies of a Brontosaurus, and it's absolutely huge. And it was discovered in 1901. The actual fossils, the actual skeleton, or the fossilized skeleton of this particular animal is in the University of Chicago. But they have a replica of it in the Dinosaur Journey Museum, as well as this monument here to exactly where it's found, and a well-maintained, although you can't go into it, opening for the mine, or the small mine where all these bones were dug out of. A great effort, and remember, this is in 1901 when the paleontology really first started. So very interesting, very cool stuff overall. I would like to spend a little bit of time talking about the Dinosaur Diamond itself. And I think the most prominent area, the most prominent part of the Dinosaur Diamond, again, which goes from about western Colorado in this area of Grand Junction. Fruita is almost a suburb of Grand Junction in western Colorado, up north to the Dinosaur National Monument, which spans both northwestern Colorado and northeastern Utah. It's headquartered in Vernal, Utah, and then out into Wyoming a bit, so almost near the Flaming Gorge National Monument, and then down into many areas in Utah, and then back over into Colorado. It's called that because it's called the Dinosaur Diamond because there are so many areas that actually have various different dinosaur digs and tens of thousands of footprints that have been discovered all through this area. There are many, many bones that you can see that are still embedded in the rocks because, for whatever reason, the paleontologists decided not to retrieve them and leave them there. In fact, one of the coolest things, and I remember seeing this in 1971 when I was a kid, dating myself there big time, going to the Dinosaur National Monument And the museum, there's an entire wall that's behind glass of dozens, hundreds probably, of dinosaur bones that they elected not to remove from the rock so that the future visitors, kids from ages 5 through 95, could look at and observe how those fossilized bones are in their natural habitat. Of course, the reason this occurs is there's so much uplift here to the east of the Colorado Plateau in the front range of the Rockies, and it's so dry, there has been so much erosion over time that this rock has been exposed. And at ancient times, particularly in this case during the late Morrison period, or I should say during the Morrison period in the late Jurassic time frame, this was a very wet area, and so therefore when the various different animals died, they would get embedded, or they would just get buried in the rivers or in the mud, and over millennia and then over millions of years, their flesh would obviously die away, the calcium in the bones would filter away, but the gap that is left inside of from where the calcium that constituted the bones is replaced by minerals and hardened. And I've always found it an utterly amazing point of science that those minerals would actually wind up looking very much like the bones themselves, except much more colorful and much harder, obviously. And obviously they wait there until scientists of the modern day can retrieve them and learn about dinosaurs. The same thing happens with trees and any type of organic material. If you go up into various different parts of Arizona, particularly the Petrified Forest, and I digress a little bit, but the Petrified Forest National Park in northeastern Arizona, near Winslow, Arizona. And yes, I did stand on a corner in Winslow, Arizona, like everybody does. The locals there think you're total idiots, but everybody's got to get that picture. But near Winslow, Arizona is this Petrified Forest National Park, and you see thousands of tree trunks that are of incredible colors, filled in, of course, again, because they were fossilized by various different minerals, quartz and all kinds of other different minerals, which I won't go into in detail here. You can just read the list. But they are absolutely beautiful, again, because the ground is cracked, the uplift has occurred, and erosion has washed away all of the dirt that is around those particular objects, which they really are separate objects right now. It's, I guess, really important from a scientific perspective to understand that that's not the original organic material, and it's not the original bones for the bones from the dinosaurs. They are minerals that filled in the gaps, and that's why they are fossils. But nonetheless, they are absolutely wonderful, and it's an amazing thing to see and understand that these objects, whether they be bones or they be ferns, they be footprints, or they be trees, have come from effects that occurred hundreds of millions of years ago at times, all the way through, mostly through that Mesozoic time period. So, wonderful overall experience. So as we finish up the day here, and then I'm going to get to the subject of the amazing history of the town of Fruita and western Colorado, and actually delve into a lot of the subject of the overall economic system in the United States. It seems like a strange subject for the Don Sullivan Show, but it really does fit within that umbrella of science, and we're going to talk about it here in a second, so I don't mean to digress. But as we're back here at the Dinosaur Journey Museum, saying goodbye to the Dinosaur Days event, I will tell you that there are tons of different types of replicas of fossils, full fossils, or full dinosaur skeletons, Allosaurus, Stegosaurus, theropods. Again, the Morrison Foundation, or Morrison Formation, the foundation of the late Jurassic period, about 163 million to 145 million years ago. It is interesting to note that the town of Morrison, where we were a few weeks ago, in the Don Sullivan Show, where we saw Sting at Red Rocks Theater, is also the Morrison Foundation. Of course it is. That's why it's named the town of Morrison. It's the same Red Rocks, and it's the same overall era. So I think it's time to be done here. We've got to get home, and I'll take a break for a minute, and we will move into the discussion of the town of Fruita. So unfortunately, unlike all of the various different depictions in Hollywood and the great replicas of the vehicles from Jurassic Park, there are no real dinosaurs here. And I did look around for as much amber as I could find to try to find some mosquitoes with some dinosaur DNA in it. And, if I did, I would have called Jeff Goldblum immediately. But haven't found any. So thank you all for listening to this first half of this episode of the Don Sullivan Show. And I'm going to take a break here for a minute, and we'll get back and we'll talk about the town of Fruita. Welcome back again, everyone, to the Don Sullivan Show. Today, again, as I mentioned, we're going to have this particular episode in two separate parts. The first part was about the Dinosaur Journey Museum in the town of Fruita, and now we're going to talk about the town of Fruita in western Colorado, a quaint little town that is only about 5 to 8 miles to the west of Grand Junction along Route 70. And Fruita has an amazing history. At first, you would think it's just a sleepy little town that if you blink, you pass by. Lots of nice scenery, and yes, you might have heard this beginning of the Dinosaur Diamond, but there is so much more to it. There is so much more to what you can understand about the way the American economy works, particularly in terms of agriculture. Now, I don't know if all of this agriculture was, and the way the agriculture has progressed over the last 250 years was actually what Thomas Jefferson had in mind when he wanted America to be an agrarian culture and an agrarian economy overall. But it has turned out that way. Big business is big business, and it will work the way big business is supposed to. That is to generate a profit in every way it can. The only real responsibility we know of businesses is to actually produce a good product, run a good business, and to meet the expectations and the demands of their shareholders. And unfortunately, over, say, the last 100 years, and most prominently over the last 30 or 40 years, the rise of globalism, the rise of America being very involved and dependent in some healthy ways and some good ways on the rest of the world, and some of the more the more seedy and more the more dangerous and the more dilapidated parts of the world, as well as the more successful parts of the world, are all part of this. But it does have its effects, that is globalism. It does have its negative effects. One of the things I will tell you is I've seen this effect in many other countries in the world as well, in my various different travels. But I think what's most important for this discussion is to understand how much potential it is not being used in the vast areas of the incredibly diversified United States. So to start with Fruita. Fruita was actually founded in the late 1800s as a farming community. And one of the reasons why it was a farming community in a farming area was simply because there was so much water, which seems like an oxymoron in an area that is almost technically a desert. A desert is defined as 10 inches of rainfall or less a year, and the area around western Colorado gets about 12 inches of rainfall a year. But there is one other factor, actually two, and the one other factor itself is the general idea of rivers, and those rivers are, of course, the Colorado River. Sometimes I call the Colorado River the greatest artist of all time because it was responsible for carving some of the greatest scenery in the world. That is all of the canyons through Utah, Canyonlands National Park, and down into Marble Canyon, and of course the Grand Canyon out into lakes, the lakes that are created by the Glen Canyon Dam, as well as the Hoover Dam, that is Lake Mead and Lake Powell. But I digress again. What's most important here is to understand that the water of the river, which really hasn't diminished nearly as much as some people might suggest, and we're going to go through some of the factors that changed Fruita over the last 150 years from a farming community into, a niche farming community, but mostly has made it back into, or created it back into, a very large desert area. So again, in the late 1800s, and it was named Fruita because of the enormous amount of fruit that it produces. Still to this day, in the Grand Junction area of Colorado, there are significant and very successful, albeit niche and small, wineries. So they produce grapes, and everybody knows what it takes to produce grapes. The conditions, say for example in France and in Napa, have to be absolutely perfect in terms of the amount of moisture and the amount of heat that hits those areas. And the same is true here in western Colorado, even though, again, it looks like a desert. But that Colorado River provides what it needs. There's also, if you go out further west into the area of Green River, Utah, about 100 miles to the west, they have an entire weekend of September dedicated to watermelons. There are areas here in western Colorado which produce some of the best peaches in the world as well. Now, my little diatribe here in this discussion is going to, should really be, and will eventually be in a different Don Sullivan show, focused on some other areas in which very, very similar things have happened to what I'm about to talk about, such as in Hawaii. The single best thing I have ever eaten in my life is pineapple, or is a pineapple, and I get them every year from the island of Maui in Hawaii. And over many years, you are able to just go into Maui if you can get there, and to buy them from the vendors on the street and have them sent home. They guarantee that they'll be there within 48 hours and they'll be fresh. And to be honest, I've never been somebody who even liked pineapples, but man, when you eat pineapples from Maui, it is absolutely incredible. But again, I digress. Going back to Colorado, it's also incredible to remember that before World War II, there was a thriving, in the Denver area, sugar beet industry because of the production of sugar. But all of these various different agricultural endeavors, whether it be sugar beets, whether it be the pineapples in Hawaii, whether it be the wine, although obviously California has a thriving wine business, whether it be all the other different fruits, including the peaches that were grown in the Fruita area, have now become niche and specialized products, really only available for people who know that they are available and are willing to spend the premium amounts of money to get a hold of these very specialized and very great delicacies that are still in the western Colorado area, still being produced. But the large businesses are not there. And I think that the The reasons that those industries failed, or at least diminished to almost negligibility, are somewhat concerning and even sad, but also give us all a tremendous sense of hope, and we certainly can aspire to one day being able to use that land around Fruita again. So let's talk about what actually happened over the period of time from about just prior to World War II on, from the Depression, that is, in the 1930s, on through present day times, to actually cause the ecology and the industrial production from a agricultural perspective to change here in western Colorado. So quite simply, 100 years ago, Fruita and all of western Colorado to a large extent, and the Denver area, as I said, with the sugar beet company, the Great Western Sugar Beet Company, I think it was named, was a major producer of fruit and exporter of fruit. And again, it was the Colorado and Green Rivers that provided that sufficient water for the fertile desert environment. Although the water provided from the mountains in Colorado beyond the Colorado Plateau is diminished, it's certainly still sufficient. And now these, as I've mentioned, these industries are somewhat niche. So the official history, if you read it anywhere on Wikipedia and so on, the official history reports that the winters got colder, which is kind of interesting since the narrative around the world, and we're going to have many Don Sullivan shows about this subject, but the narrative around the world, of course, is the entire world is getting warmer. But in this case, one of the problems was that the area got cooler, as well as something called a codling moth and other viruses and various different diseases and disorders damaged the fruit production. And of course, this occurred the worst possible times and during the Depression, and the various different farms were unable to maintain their supply chains, their forward supply chains, that is. Their buyers were simply not providing enough capital to keep their farming businesses running, and everything runs on business. Remember, all wars and everything is economic for the most part. So the local farmers, for the most part, were accused of being ineffective and incompetent to a large extent by local news and also through history. And I think that the main truth is much greater and broader overall economic realities, and that certainly is the huge onslaught of overall globalism. Obviously, there is monopoly forces that exist in pretty much every industry in the United States, but when you look at the various different companies that run the fruit industry in the United States, it really amounts to three of them. And to a large extent, and I mentioned the pineapples in Hawaii and the sugarcane development and so on, it was for various different reasons, both ecological, permitting, the creation of various different government agencies, labor costs, and so on. It became, for some bizarre reason, much less expensive to import these various fruits over tens of thousands of miles sometimes, but certainly thousands of miles, and sometimes over ocean, into the United States rather than actually growing them here. Now, again, that does leave us with hope that this land could again be used for that type of production. And in fact, pretty easily, I think, if the capital infrastructure were put in place and the motivation existed in the various different enterprises and individuals to move these various different existing farms from the niche farms that they are back into enterprises. But that, again, is a bit of a different subject. One of the things that I think is particularly entertaining and almost laughable is that many of these farms, which still run, again, as I've mentioned, as existing farms that do produce and are actually profitable, but they're small. They're actually listed in the National Register of Historic Places, and they're actually supported by the National Park Service. Now, I'll give you some other examples here. This isn't fruit, but it's certainly agriculture. The town of Olathe, about 50 miles south, is a major niche producer of sweet corn called Olathe sweet corn. And what I will tell you is that when that corn crop comes in, hundreds of people who were in the know from the Colorado area, particularly western Colorado, sweep into these various different locations, some of which are just on the roads in parking lots with huge trucks full of this corn crop, because it's wonderful extra sweet corn that people just die for. And it's not terribly expensive, but it's a little bit more expensive than corn you would get in your regular grocery stores. It's certainly not shipped all around the country. You just pick it up literally right from the farmers themselves. I've done that myself a few times over the years. I've helped people at least. As I mentioned before, peaches are produced as well. Peaches are produced particularly in the town of Palisade, Green River, Utah, of course, also with the watermelons that I mentioned before. Another major crop that used to be produced in western Colorado are cherries. And in fact, in the June timeframe, there is hundreds of people go to western Colorado just to pick the fruit themselves, the cherries themselves. And the idea of that is you get to go out there and pick a couple of baskets of cherries and then weigh them yourself and then take them home after you've paid for them at a certain price. They don't have to pay for labor that way because the customers actually provide their own labor. So this whole area of Colorado is tremendous in terms of the potential and the history of producing fruit overall. And I want to sort of end this discussion up with, again, the hope overall. And I really want to ask the question, what the hell happened, and what is the future for western Colorado and Utah in regards to overall production of fruit? You can look into the history, and I won't get into the economics or the business structure of the Great Western Sugar Beet Company, which filed for bankruptcy finally in 1985. But it was a tremendous producer of sugar in the Denver area for a very long time. And I think certainly all Americans hope that we are able to once again utilize the resources, live with the land, as some people say, and produce off the land as much as possible and not leave it to just sit there and not be utilized. One of the things that's one of my favorite themes of my life is the vast resources within the United States, whether it be the fuels, the hydrocarbon fuels that are in abundance everywhere in many different forms, or the potential for growing all kinds of crops in the Midwest and fruit in the West, as well as the park resources themselves. We're going to have many Don Sullivan shows that get into not only myself hiking and looking at the various different scenery and the geology, but the national parks themselves and the type of rejuvenating capability that they have to all Americans. I've always believed that so many of America's youth who are not as well off or privileged as many others, their lives would be changed so tremendously by just spending a summer going to the various different national parks all around the country, not just out west. So with that bit of preachiness, I'm going to end my discussion here on the town of Fruita and the history of Fruita and the situation of the various different existing businesses that are, again, very niche, the wineries, the places you can get peach, the sweet corn, the cherries, the the Watermelon Festival in September in Green River, Colorado, all along Route 70. All incredible things to experience and see, all of which I've been lucky enough to experience myself. I hope Jersey Steve comes on here to give us a couple of comments. But with this experimental new dual episode of the Don Sullivan Show, we talked about the variety of different subjects, that is the Dinosaur Diamond and Dinosaur Journeys Museum with the Dinosaur Days weekend, as well as the history of Fruita and Western Colorado in terms of fruit, two totally different subjects. But given the fact that I came out here this weekend for this particular event, it was impossible to avoid both subjects. And I assure you the Don Sullivan Show is going to have a multitude of different episodes on both of those subjects separately, and we're going to find guests to talk about them in much greater detail than I can, because quite honestly, I'm just out here ranting, giving you my impressions overall. And but we're going to have a lot more interesting, a lot more in-depth discussions with true experts as we move along. And with that, folks, I would like to remind you that all at-bats are situational. Please download and listen to all of the Don Sullivan shows. We definitely appreciate our vast audience, and we will see you soon, and see you in the next episode.